Thank you very much. Before I set out on this little jaunt, everybody told me I was going to die. I applied to Sir Ranulph Fiennes' Transglobe Expedition Trust for funding, and they went away to their Amazon expert, and he came back saying that to walk the entire length of the Amazon River was impossible. Luckily, they've got this lovely tradition of supporting mad but marvellous expeditions, so they said, right, OK, this guy clearly qualifies, he's absolutely mad, and if he comes back alive, that'll be marvellous, and so they chucked me some money. The only people who actually said that the expedition was possible and that I would succeed were my family and friends, which was really sweet. And my mum, for example, said, "Oh, I know, Edward, you'll definitely get to the end," which is brilliant, but she hadn't got a clue what she was talking about. The plan was really, really simple. We were going to leave the Pacific coast of Peru, walk up and over the Andes mountains, find the furthest source of the Amazon River, walk pretty much the whole length of Peru, through the southern tip of Colombia, and then right the way across Brazil to the mouth of the Amazon. Logistically, that's pretty easy to do. You keep the river on the left-hand side, you keep walking downhill, and 2.5 years later, you end up at the Atlantic Ocean. In my mind, I wanted it to take a year, so I divided the length of the river by 365 days, and I came up with 11 miles a day. And I thought, yeah, I could walk 11 miles a day, that doesn't sound too far. But literally, with sort of machete in hand, opening a path through the jungle for about 65% of the journey, we averaged 4 miles a day, so the expedition took 860 days to complete. Luke Collier was the guy who I started this expedition with, and him and I were based in London before I started, and we had every opportunity to go to the Royal Geographical Society to get the official coordinates for the official furthest source of the Amazon, but we didn't. We went to Wikipedia instead, and not surprisingly, the coordinates were completely wrong, so we were on the wrong mountain, and the river that fed off it didn't even flow into the Amazon basin at all. But we sort of used the force a little bit and eventually found this quite famous white cross, and you can see this little trickle of water flowing down on the right-hand side of the screen, and we thought, oh, brilliant, okay, so we took some photos, but then we found another cross, an iron cross, and then we found a plaque, a metal plaque, and then we found a fourth item, a plaque as well. We thought, this is rubbish, there can't be 4 official furthest sources of the Amazon, so we decided, as there was glaciers above us, and therefore sort of subglacial streams, that we would just cover all bases, summit the mountain on which the furthest source of the Amazon springs, and then there's definitely no water above us. From this point onwards, I have to admit, quite a few things started going downhill, and then sadly, one of the first things was my relationship with Luke. We were quite different characters, and I was ex-military, he was a sort of outdoor instructor, a climber and kayaker, but the relationship started to deteriorate, and it became like we were trapped in a bad marriage. Literally the way Luke would drink his coffee in the morning and wouldn't be able to talk to anyone else and wouldn't be able to concentrate on anything else until he drank his coffee would really piss me off. And I know that I pissed him off a lot in return as well. But to cut a long story short, after 3 months, Luke said, "Ed, I've had enough of you," and he went home. Just coincidentally, at this time, the expedition did actually start getting quite a lot more serious. This is a Rondero outpost in the Red Zone. The Red Zone being the drugs trafficking area of Peru. 2/3 of the world's cocaine is grown in this area, and the headwaters of the Amazon just go straight through. And so these guys, the Ronderos, they're put in place of the police force of Peru, because if the police force go in, they'll be shot by the drugs traffickers. So these guys police the area for petty crimes like theft, etc. And these were the guys who were asking permission to come through, and increasingly they were just saying, "You're absolutely crazy. You're a white man with an HD video camera on his shoulder. You're going to get yourself killed." The Red Zone also spills into an area very, very close off Amerindian tribes. You can see they're shorts and T-shirt wearing Indians, and the guy on the right has got a shotgun, but they were 100% indigenous, and they've been treated pretty badly by the Peruvian government, and they were very, very suspicious of outsiders. I walked with these guys, the Shananka Indians, for about a day and a half, and I'd always try and have a guide walking with me, but eventually nobody would walk with me, and I thought, okay, well, I need to reduce the risk as much as possible, so I GPS'd where I'd got to. I took a boat downriver to another town, and again went round asking all the adult males if they'd walk with me, and nobody would. And then this little boy came up to me, about that high, with a massive grin on his face, and said, "I'll walk with you." I was like, "Brilliant, okay, how old are you?" And he said, 16. Okay, that's not perfect. What's your name? Elias. So Elias and I set off together and bought him a pair of plimsolls and a pair of shorts, and we looked a little bit suspicious together, I have to admit. But on the boat, on the way back to where I GPS'd where I'd stopped walking, I said to Elias, "Why were you living with your uncle and aunt?" And he said, "Well, because my mum was murdered with a nail through the throat." And my Spanish was still quite bad at this stage, so I sort of tried to convey my condolences as best I could and said, "That's horrific, when was that?" And he said, on Wednesday. And literally, this guy's mother had been murdered 6 days before I met him. And I just thought, isn't that incredible? The only person who's prepared to walk through this quite dangerous area of Peru is this 16-year-old kid. His mother has just been murdered. It put my own fears in quite a lot of perspective. Elias and I walked for about 6 days together through various different communities until eventually we came into one called Pamakiari, which was an Ashaninka community, quite deserted. And we walked in, and the first thing was a woman who ran out screaming and threw a bucket of water all over me. And then this group of women, Ashaninka women, predominantly women, sort of amassed in front of me, and they were very, very angry. One of them had red plant dye on her hands, and she smeared it all over my face as a sort of insult. And I was very aware that they didn't want me there at all. At the back of this group was a woman wearing similar earrings and jewellery and red face paint, and I caught her eye, and she sort of stepped forward through the crowd and held up a hand, and in a really posh English accent said, "Are you English? My name's Emily." And I was just like, thank God. Emily ended up being an Italian anthropologist who had been given permission to live in this village, and she spent a year and a half gaining the trust of these people in order to go in, be allowed to go in and live with them and study them. And I just rocked up with my rucksack expecting it to be all smiles, and not surprisingly it wasn't. And because of this interaction with Emily, the village calmed down, but Emily was able to sort of teach me a little bit more about the background of the Ashaninkas, and they've been subjected to horrendous atrocities. And when the Shining Path, the sort of communist guerrillas in Peru came through, whole generations of men were wiped out if they didn't join the Shining Path, and whole generations of women violated many times. And as a result, I suppose, through talking to Emily, I ended up, rather than feeling any negativity towards this attrition that I was coming across as I walked through, I ended up being really, really proud of these guys, because all they're doing really is defending their homes and their lifestyle. Emily also introduced me. Elias had to go home. He was a little bit too young. He was joining the army. Emily introduced me to the guy on the left, who was called Cho. And Cho was a forestry worker, and he was out of work, and he said, okay, he felt sorry for me, I think. He said, I'm out of work, I'll give you 5 days, which is how long I think it will take you to walk out of the red zone. So we started walking together. Cho's an evangelical Christian, so he started singing Christian songs in Spanish at the top of his voice, which I found really annoying, I have to admit. But he did have bags of confidence, and at a time when I was really, really struggling, that confidence was really necessary. And after 5 days, Cho said to me, do you know what, I'm quite enjoying this. If you want, I'll walk with you to the next town, which he did, which was about 10 days later. And then in that town, we had a little conversation, and he said, if you want, I'll walk with you all the way to the mouth of the Amazon, which he did. And he literally never went home. He walked for the next 2 years with me. He then, after the expedition, we got him over to England. He was living with my mum over in Leicestershire for about 4.5 months and played rugby for my local rugby club. At the end of season dinner, they made him Overseas Player of the Year, which was quite nice. Okay, at the beginning of 2009, the world was going through this horrible economic downturn, and all the banks were going to the wall. I mean, it's still pretty much the same now, isn't it? But I just thought, what a lucky position I am. I'm in the middle of the Amazon, nothing can really touch me. And then I got an email from our main sponsor. We had an internet satellite link saying, really sorry, but we completely ran out of money. We can't continue to fund your trip. So we thought, okay, we can't let something as daft as money get in the way of this trip, and actually walking by the river was costing us a lot of money. So we just decided to head straight into the trees where there'd be less money spent on accommodation, on food, and hiring guides, and we took 2 apex points of a massive meander in the Amazon River, which was 350 kilometers apart, and just headed on a straight line straight through the forest. And it was all well and good, but because we were going away from the river, all of the dangers were exacerbated. So, you know, we were away from our evacuation route, we were away from people, so we really knew. We did a risk assessment of it, and it came out as unacceptable, and then we sort of grinned at each other and went, okay, not much we can do about that, really. So we just set out, and a lot of things happened on that journey. It ended up being the most amazing part of the trip, because we were having to just rely on our wits. All of the kit was breaking at this stage. The most important bit of kit that broke was the GPS. And I'd always been sort of quite proud of the fact that I knew that I could survive without a GPS, and we'd got a map and compass. But Brazilians have got amazing 1 to 100 topographical maps of their whole country, but they're military maps, and they wouldn't give them to me. So I was having to navigate off a 1 to 4 million map of the top half of South America, which 1 millimetre is 4 kilometres on the ground, and we're moving that about a day, so moving a millimetre. So taking bearings with a map and compass was a bit comical, to say the least. As I said, we had this internet satellite link, and I'd created this sort of very small online following, but all literally we had to do was point this thing up through a hole in the jungle canopy caused by a fallen tree, and we had the fastest internet in the whole of the Amazon. Literally, I was tweeting every day, uploading videos and blogs. I knew Michael Jackson was dead within 2 minutes of it being announced on the internet, and bizarrely, my sister emailed me to ask me if I was okay, because I used to be a big Michael Jackson fan. But I was fine. We used this thing. I just thought, right, we've run out of money. This is a bit irresponsible. Now our insurance has lapsed. All the kit's breaking, including sort of all the emergency kit as well. So I put out this plea online and put a PayPal link on the website and just asked people to donate to the trip. And the response was utterly humbling, I have to admit. We had kids in South Africa donating their pocket money. We had kids in England doing teddy tombolas, where they all took their teddies into school, bought each other's teddies off them, went home with each other's teddies, and then gave me all the money, which I felt a little bit guilty about, I have to admit. But it was phenomenal. In the last year of the expedition, £43,000 came in from various sources in order to keep the whole thing afloat, which was pretty humbling, I have to say.
It's an obvious thing, isn't it, walking through a forest like this, that if you let it get to you, that it's going to be so much harder. And yet it is so difficult at times, keeping your sense of humour, because deep down you don't find it very funny. It's not very funny.
I have to say I didn't find it very funny. There's photos taken about 2 years into the expedition, so I've only got about 4 months left to go. And I suppose by this stage I knew I was going to get to the end. And I don't know whether it's that I let my guard drop, but you'd think that the most hard things about walking the Amazon would be venomous snakes or anacondas or jaguars or electric eels or something, or even the indigenous tribes. But I have to admit, by this stage, the far hardest thing was just keeping it together mentally. I was really struggling, and the tiniest of things would go wrong. Cho would be 2 minutes late packing up his hammock into his rucksack, and he'd delay us by 2 minutes. Bearing in mind we've got 4 months left of walking, and I would get furious, and I'd stay in this furious mood all day, and it was horrible for Cho, and it wasn't particularly pleasant for me either. And I just thought, this is ridiculous. Everyone's always told me that, you know, it's not going to be the physical part that's going to be the hardest. It's going to be the mental part, the top 2 inches, and yet that's the one thing that I'd done no training for whatsoever. And so I decided to get the satellite phone out, and I rang a neuro-linguistic programming expert, a sort of NLP guru, just to get a bit of advice, really, as to how to get out of this sort of mental trap of negativity. And he was brilliant. I just had 3 half-an-hour conversations with him, and he just said, it's not surprising that you're struggling slightly. You've been sort of out of Western society and the people that you know and love and can communicate well with for so long, and we're all meant to interact like that. And so he just gave me a few things to give me perspective again, and little tricks, basically, mind tricks. And one of the things he got me to do was to envisage someone in my life next to me who was really inspirational. And so when I could feel myself going into one of these almost childish moods, I would imagine my first sergeant major in the military, who was a guy called Mark Hale. And Mark was a massive chap. He was a rugby player, he was a Christian, and he was doing an MSc in psychology, so not a sort of typical squaddy, really inspirational guy, loads of charisma. And whenever I could feel myself going into one of these negative periods, I would imagine Mark just standing there looking at me with a slightly bemused grin on his face, saying, "Sir, what on earth are you doing?" And of course I would never have acted like that had Mark been around or had anyone been around. And it was just little things like that enabled me to laugh at myself and stop being so focused on the end to the detriment of my actual mind state. And as a result, the last few months of the expedition were quite a lot more positive as a result. That story is made a little bit more pertinent by the fact that I'd never checked the internet for the website for news, because I didn't have enough bandwidth and I didn't have enough battery power. But this one day I just decided to throw caution to the wind, and I went on the BBC website, and the first headline that comes up saying soldier dies in explosion in Afghanistan, and it was Mark, and he left behind his wife Brenda and his 2 teenage daughters. And it was without doubt the saddest day of the expedition for me. And I just thought, wow, isn't it incredible that you know, the guy that I've chosen in order to continue to inspire me to do the expedition is now gone. And I sat down there for a while and I thought, well, crikey, that's actually, in a way, I felt this bond, the fact that I'd sort of brought him up just before he'd died. And I ended up thinking, right, I'm deliberately going to continue using Mark to continue to inspire me for the rest of the journey, which I did. And obviously, I gave this talk before quite recently, and Mark's daughter came in just before I was about to give the talk, actually. And I had this slide up, and I thought, that's horrendous. You know, I can't take it out. I've got to talk about this. But luckily, she came up to me afterwards and gave me a big hug and said it was nice that she'd mentioned her dad. It gets happier, I promise. Right. The end of the expedition, you can't avoid it. It would be lovely to spill out of the Amazon, straight from the Amazon into the Atlantic Ocean. But there's this horrible road network. And we were late to arrive on this road network. And we'd got our plane tickets booked for a certain date. And we'd also got some media crews agreed to be on the beach at the end of the expedition. And so we had about a week of these ridiculously long days of caning it down this road in the blistering sun and getting about an hour and a half sleep each night. And after about a week of this, it was 20 hours or so before we were due to be at the beach, and we were meant to be there in the morning. I just said to Cho as we were walking down the street, I'm so exhausted, I just need to have a rest. And Cho, in a sort of typically South American way, says, don't be so gay. And I said, Cho, I'm not being gay. Anyway, I collapsed at the side of the road, came up with this sort of almost like a nettle sting rash all over my body and was itching like mad. Eventually passed out in the road, and then when I came around, Cho and I decided, right, we need to have 2 hours enforced sleep. And then we had about 17 hours left to do this 85 kilometres to the beach. So we walked all the way through the afternoon, the evening, the night. And then as the sun came up in the morning, it was incredible. These media crews descended on us, and Cho and I just started floating down the road, really. It was incredible, sort of on a high of adrenaline, really. And then we could smell the salt in the air. You know when you're by the seaside and you can smell the fact that you're near the sea. And then we could hear the sounds of the waves crashing. And then we rounded this corner and we could just see the Atlantic Ocean stretched out in front of us. And Cho and I just instinctively grinned at each other and shrugged off our rucksacks and started legging it down the beach into the Atlantic Ocean. And also instinctively, but I'm not sure why, we started holding hands as we as we ran into the ocean. I just thought, it's typical, isn't it? The one day in the world that the world's media is looking at you and you're holding hands, skipping into the ocean. The last thing I want to say is you can see the look on Cho's face. He'd never seen the sea before at this point. He came from a landlocked part of Peru, and he deserves a massive amount of credit because he always knew that he'd never be able to say that he walked the length of the Amazon because he joined in month 5, but he did it for completely selfless reasons, and he's an amazing man, and I owe very much of this expedition to him. Thank you very much indeed. Cheers.